Mercia is not about who governs it, or what is said about it," she continued, "but it is what grows in here." She put her hand to her chest. "I am not a Mercia by birth, but I am a Mercian by choice. Today, as every day, when I am in your great land, I choose to risk my life for this land, for your people, for your earth. I choose it above Wessex, above St. and East Anglia or the Bradgerland, Cymru, who is your neighbour and refuses to stand with you when you need it. I choose it above even Alba, because every day in Mercia is worth fighting for the freedom of this realm." And she looked about at the faces who had been faithful to her, Osrith, even when they had had no cause to other than that she had been named their captain. Every one of them was looking at her, head high. "We fight," she concluded, "for Mercia." "For Mercia," they replied, in voices so loud that they must have been heard over the roar of battle. "Mercia, Mercia, Mercia." 88,888,888. At the west gate, Aethelstan had broken his men up and had now reformed against his own city. Standing beside the West Saxons, he looked at the palisade wall and was in conversation with Wessex's army general, Aldred. "What was that about?" Finan asked Uhtred, confused. "I thought we were fighting against Wessex, for Mercia." "We are," Uhtred told him. "But Mercia, in this case, Aethelstan, has chosen to fight with the West Saxons, against the mercant traitors who are trying to garner independence from Wessex. They are the ones trapped inside fighting a losing battle." He watched Finan shake his head. "And they say the Irish are mad," he told his friend. "I do not understand that in the slightest. I am glad I follow you, 'tis all. All we need to do is help reduce their number," he told Finan. "And how are we supposed to know which of the Mercian bastards are for Aethelstan and which are not?" It was a reasonable question. It wasn't just a case of looking to see where the Lord of Mercia actually was, and who was following him. The guards on the ramparts, understandably, were trying to prevent a Wessex breach of the walls, while some of them were debating whether to open the gates again, seeing as Aethelstan had turned his back on the West Saxons and was trying to make his own city's fortifications yield to axe and sword blows. "Look for anything unusual," he told Finan. "Like Mercian guard firing down onto their own guard." He pointed to one part of the ramparts where half a dozen longbowmen were aiming into the confusion outside the city walls. "Get up there," Finan told Berg and Sihtric. "Get those bastards down before they manage to hit any of the West Saxons." Both men paused, and looked instinctively to Uhtred for guidance against what sounded like logical orders from Finan. "Yes," Uhtred told them, "do as you are told." And they went to it, scrambling over the ramparts until they reached the walkway. And there, Uhtred told him, sliding his sword into his scabbard, mid-run to an attacking position. He gestured to the western rampart where a company of men were descending to the outer field. "Where was it you said your wife was?" "Alba." "Or has Beric suddenly become a lot closer to Cester?" Finan looked, and saw indeed that Osrith was leading her company of men. He smiled. "Yes," he agreed. "Well?" Uhtred demanded to know. "Why is she over there, commanding a mercant company?" "She will have her reasons," he replied, his words irritatingly reasonable. "Doesn't she owe several months to Aethelstan, for the death of that commander, Eadith's brother?" "No, Ethelfled sent her away, debt paid." Uhtred shot back. "As well you know." Around them flakes of snow began to fall. "Perhaps Aethelstan reinstated it," Finan continued, again, annoyingly reasonable. Uhtred shook his head, annoyed that he could not get a rise out of his friend about his accursed sister, and thrust serpent breath into the hard earth. Then he sighed, and clapped Finan on the back. "You married her?" Finan said nothing. He didn't even look longingly over to Osrith, as she climbed down the ramparts onto the outer side of the palisade wall. It was so frustrating. "If you are going to keep it a secret, I could demand it," Uhtred said at last, resorting to threats that even he knew Finan had reduced him to. "I did," his friend confessed, and there was a pang of hurt in Uhtred's heart, as much for his friend as his estranged sister. She had fixed it that he would claim Bibbenberg, not his cousin, her other brother. After everything he had done to her over the years, she was loyal to him. In the end, more snow fell. 2 shillings. Finan added, holding out a hand. Was it beautiful? Utad asked, handing over the coins reluctantly. She was, Finan replied, matter-of-factly, as he looked for the weakness, the mistake of the Independencers. That bastard Constantine witnessed it. You still hate him then? Utad asked, equally matter-of-factly. I do, Finan told him, peering out into the sea of fighting men. I hate him more than I hate the devil. There, the mistake. A thin line of mercenaries who seemed to be on the side of the West Saxon fighters had turned and were attacking them. Too close to the eastern gate. It was vulnerable. And where will you live? Utad asked, looking where Finan was pointing. She will remain in Berwick, or at least I think she will, Finan added, giving a light chuckle. And I will remain in your service, Lord, and live at Berwick when I am not needed by you. You will always be needed by me, Utad told him, and Finan turned his head sharply. But I will not let it be said that a lord kept another lord from his people. For you are now a lord, are you not? Finan's face was a picture. He had spent his life post-slavery trying to avoid titles of all sorts, titles and positions and responsibilities. I understand you are called a Mormon now? Utad was really trying to wind Finan up, now, and it was working. But there was no more time for this awkward conversation, for just then, the West Palisade Wall was attacked with the full force of the West Saxons, and with them, the Norse. 88,888,888 Norse. Elfkin called, as they fought, backs to the wood of their own fortress while blow after blow came onto them. Already Osrith thought she had lost Falkbald, yet he was found several minutes later with his sword embedded in the backbone of a West Saxon warrior. Osrith had no time to think, but plunge on. And on they fought, as Norse and West Saxon and some of the mercen warriors fought them, until a banging on shield was given, and confusion reigned. Some of the fighting waned, especially when mercen faced mercen. But others, West Saxons, Norse, were still going, intensifying as they saw what they thought was their goal, the West Gate. Back. Osrith called, back. And they slipped through a group of mercenaries who were now united with one another and had turned their backs on Cester and were instead uniting against the West Saxon men, ignoring the urges of their commanders to turn and fight again. Ossier and Egelfrith were isolated, however, and a West Saxon warrior, huge like Osrith remembered Steeper to be, was bearing down on them. And the only way to fight Steeper, Osrith reminded herself, was to be nimble, be quick, and she attacked his hamstrings at the place where the two parts of his armor had the tiniest of gaps. The huge man howled in pain, and began to try to swat Osrith with his arm. Go! She shouted to Ossier, and he pulled his brother away from a fight against a Norseman. Norse boy, Osrith thought, before stopping. She forgot to run, however, and the big West Saxon caught her at the head and knocked her over. Osrith scrambled back. But she had seen, nevertheless, on 4 big horses, leaving Cester, had been Aldhelm, Miral and another 2 men. The Independence factions, Osrith knew. They had been attempting to impose their idea of Mercia from inside Cester, and when Aethelstan had formed a plan to capture them in the city, they had still made it out. Osrith fell onto the hard ground from the blow of the West Saxon warrior. Blood came to her temple as her head hit a rock. The man raised his sword in both hands. The end of Osrith. But it didn't come. Instead, like a towering rock teetering on the edge of a cliff, the man tumbled to one side with an audible thump. Finan's blade had done the work. Her husband looked at Osrith, giving her this is what you call trying to keep yourself safe. Look. Finan made to bend to Osrith, but stopped when he saw Elfkin. He was close enough to help, and was in the process of scooping her up under her arm. He stopped when he saw Finan glare at him. However, this only lasted for a second, and he then backed away, watching as Osrith's commander helped her to her feet, then stepped lightly over to Utad, who was busy organizing the mercenaries, as per Aethelstan's instructions. Elfkin watched the man glance over his shoulder once or twice, and then commented to Osrith that he had been looking at her through most of the battle. Your husband? Elfkin exclaimed, as he helped her towards where her company were standing. Utad of Bibbenberg's man? He's He stopped when he saw Osrith's face. "He is in service to Uhtred, as I am in service to Mercia," she explained, then asked, "Where's Kaltigar?" "With us," Falkball told Osrith. "He fought well, Lady Captain," he added. "I have never seen one so natural in my life," he enthused. Kaltigar, who had also sustained a blow to the head, smiled as Osrith came nearer. "I fought well. I killed many," he told Osrith, "and nearly all of them were the enemy," joked Egelfrith, who turned to Kaltigar and clapped him on the back. "You saved my life," he added. "Elfkin showed me," Kaltigar said, with his usual understatedness. "You should thank your captain." Over at the other side of the field, Uhtred could be heard talking loudly to Aldhelm about the battle. "And you think Constantine is behind this?" Aldhelm asked, laughing. "What has the Lord Aethelstan told you?" "His peace accord still holds, and that the Norse are coming here in refuge from Irion," Uhtred divulged, reluctantly. "But he has given the Western Isles to the Norse. He has an understanding between Anlaf and his daughter." But Aldhelm was laughing and forcing himself not to show it. "Uhtred, the Western Isles belonged to Strathclyde, and they were taken, not given." He clapped Uhtred on the back. "Speak to the Lord Aethelstan, he will tell you that the King of Alba is in no way involved." "He's involved, all right," Finan confided to Uhtred. "And not just because I saw Osrith either," he added. "Constantine is too clever to tell her outright. He will have just manipulated her into coming for some reason, the mercen debt of time she owes, or something. So she is here, and not somewhere else." "Where might somewhere else be?" Uhtred asked. "Could be anywhere, Alba, Picton ... Irion, even." Finan shook his head. "There has been much sorrow in Irion," he added, "and I wouldn't put it past that bastard to use it for his own advantage." "Sounds like you like the Scottish bastard," Uhtred told him, as they assembled for Aethelstan to see. The West Saxons were retreating to their camp. "I hate him," Finan told Uhtred, once again, "hated him once more than I hated my brother later on." "Yes, you said." "Why?" Uhtred had not heard that story, and it was sounding promising. "He and his friend, a girl, played on a beach near the Foyle, several times." "And when I say played, well," Finan shook his head. "They were two young people alone on a beach, you know what I'm saying," he added. "But they were Uineal scum, and if there is anything we hated more, Connell and I, was a Uineal. I am sorry to say my brother and I did not treat them well." "And what happened to the girl?" Uhtred asked, noting that this was the first time Finan had ever referred to his brother by name. "She got herself tied up to a rock because she was a witch, and we waited for her to drown," Finan told his friend. "But, we ran when the sun began to be blotted out. Bit by bit. That was how we knew she was a witch." "A good story," Uhtred replied. "I wonder where she is now?" "I married her, 5 weeks ago," Finan grinned, watching Uhtred's mouth open in horrified fascination. "Your sister has led a full and interesting life, Uhtred of Bibbenberg. You should speak to her about it, sometime." "She works for Aethelstan's enemy," Uhtred said, testily. "She works to survive, a deal she must have agreed to with the current king of Alba. And thanks be to God for chancing on the future king of Alba in a bloody fight between the Picts and Norse," Finan continued, "and was rewarded with a home for saving the Scottish bastard's life." He lowered his voice, for Aethelstan was nearing. "It was where she ended up when she fled your uncle," Finan hissed, "but she never forgot Bibbenberg was yours. She looked after Thera and Bukka's daughter tried to rescue her mother." "I do not want to hear this," Uhtred told Finan, but could not do anything to make his friend stop talking. And before that, Finan carried on, as if he hadn't heard Uhtred. "After she left Irion and left Alba, she came down to Wessex to find you. Worked for Lord Odda before she worked for Alfred. Survived Edward and Ethelwold's mistreatment." Finan paused, and then added, matter-of-factly, "and then went back to Alba." "How do you know all of this?" Uhtred asked him, turning to slowly look at his friend. He had chosen a place where Uhtred could not flee, Aethelstan approaching to give congratulations. "Because I talk to people, I listen," Finan told him. "The bedroom is not just for one thing, you know. Afterwards, we talk. Thyra burned to death, Uhtred retorted. No, she did not, Finan insisted. Osrith got her out. And a healer, AMD, otherwise good pagan woman by the name of Allah, delivered Thyra of a baby girl. The same healer who tried to help Osrith help Gisela. Had he gone too far? Uhtred, however, did not look like he had even heard Finan's words. And she took the baby, my sister, that is, back to somewhere she knew was safe, Finan told him, and in doing so provided a safe, happy place for her upbringing and, in time, for young Finan. Dunnottar is beautiful, although I would say that it reminds me of Ulster. And now you are Lord of Berwick, Uhtred replied. Aethelstan was not far now, congratulating, talking to a group of Norsemen. One in particular seemed very interested in his words. Indeed I am, Finan nodded. I am your neighbor and yes, technically, a Mormor of Alba. Though, as I have duties to attend to with you, Uhtred of Bibbenberg, I cannot tend to the land myself, and I have, at my wife's discretion, left a steward in charge. Uhtred then turned his head slowly to his friend, a wide smile on his face. Finan, you are so obviously in love I could kiss you. Don't do that, Osrith would kill you. And you know she could. And after they had been spoken to by Aethelstan, congratulating them on their role, Uhtred and his men continued to laugh as they went to the alehouse in Seaster that their lord Uhtred favoured for some reason. The White Swan, Sigrid. The Dirty Duck, Uhtred commented, and they all laughed. In Manchester, where Uhtred availed most of her services, for they had asserted the nuns Aethelstan had sent to establish a nunnery there. You are my brother-in-law, said Uhtred, clapping him on the back. We drink to a man ensnared in love. And so they did drink, until they all went off to the stables, heavily inebriated. All except Uhtred of Bibbenberg, who had spied his little mouse, and went off with her to her little mouse hole, alone. Osrith's evening, however, was not as pleasant as her brother's. Her head wound was enough to cause her to be dizzy, and Eswi had taken her to Miral's room at the back of the armory and laid her on the bed. Because he won't be needing it, tonight at any rate, Eswi told her, which confirmed to Osrith what she had seen before being knocked over. And Eswi, once he had sent Osrith's company to a different alehouse in the east of the city, almost demolished from the siege on the wall that day, but still standing, sat beside Osrith, chiding her and praising her in turn. What possessed you to take command like that? He asked, soothing the side of her head, which had become swollen. Because I am their captain, Eswi, she told him. Would you be telling a man off for leading his men? This man, this hypothetical man of whom you speak, may not just have entered into an agreement with the king of Alba to go to Mercia for intelligence, he emphasized, not to fight. And he went on to tell her of the Norse, and how it was he knew that Stjora was dead. Ska tilde Pilcro LL Grimason, recently come from Irian with hundreds of wolf warriors, had descended on Eofoic. Sigtryggr survived, as did their children, but Stjora was cornered, and she fought back. Osrith could imagine she was truly Uhtred's child, and she could imagine taking out 4 or 5 Norse in her demise. No, Osrith said at length, having closed her eyes and opened them again a few hours later. This battle wasn't just about West Saxon and Mercia. I saw you ride with Miral and 2 other men away to the east today. Perhaps the blow to the head has come a little sharply, Eswi told her, and then added, sh. When he saw Osrith trying to prop herself up with her elbows in defiance. All right, I will tell you, if only to stop you from getting yourself worked up. And Eswi told Osrith of Aethelstan's meeting of the Wittens, which was to be held at Tamworth, how Wessex and East Anglia, St. and the Mercian Witten, under Aethelstan himself, were going to redeclare their loyalty to one another. But, you forgot Northumbria, Osrith pointed out, and then thought, Aethelstan would never forget Northumbria. Sigtryggr is invited also, Eswi told him, as is Eagifu. Eagifu? Osrith had to think, which was hard with the pain in her temple. Not. Eagifu, Ethelstan's twin sister? I have said not a thing, we told her, and I will deny it to anyone who asks. But yes, it is a design to stop the independence movement in Wessex, because Constantine needs to know that some lands in Britain desire independence, and that subsumption, ultimately, under the crown of Wessex is not inevitable. He leaned over and kissed Osith's forehead. And I fear that Miral and Aldhelm are being led into a trap. Later, when she finally fell back to sleep again, we left Osrith in the armory room, glancing back for a moment, watching her sleeping form. But Osrith was not asleep, not quite. And in that semi-slumber, one thing occurred to Osrith more deeply than anything else. She needed to be at Tamworth, too.